Well, good morning. I said good morning. There we go. My name is Jordan Hubbard. I'm the minister of the word here at Crestview, and I am so glad that you're here. If you're one of our guests, I hope that you have enjoyed your time with us, and I hope that you find us to be a warm and loving, welcoming congregation. I do want to refer everyone to look at your bulletin this week. There's something, we have a couple of things I do want to remind you about. We've got a bunch going to camp this week, and so we have this part right here that says pray big, and every day there's specific things that we're asking the congregation to pray for, and we'd have really appreciated if you would lift camp up in your prayers and keep us in your prayers daily. Dare I say hourly in your prayers about this. Pray for the counselors from about 9 o'clock through about 1 o'clock a.m. Every day. That would be good. Also, we have right here Mission Waco Backpack Drive. We're beginning that and beginning the collections for that. And for the whole month of July, we're going to be taking up backpacks and also collecting school supplies for kids that are getting ready to go back to school. And I know that's a terrible thing to think about in July. It's an awful thing to think about in July, especially for you teachers that are out there. But as a service to the kingdom, we're going to think about such things even today. So I want to remind you about that. Go ahead and start collecting those things and getting them in. Let's pray together. God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the time that we have. God, thank you for the way that your kingdom comes in our midst. And God, I pray that we would always be thinking about your word and your ways. God, as we dive into your word again today, I pray that you would pour through me a gift of preaching. I pray that you open us all to you and your move in a fresh way. Give us eyes to see, give us ears to hear. God, I pray that we would come to know Jesus and know him even more today. And Lord, I pray that you take out our old hearts and replace them with hearts of flesh and hearts that are attuned to worship you. God, thank you for your Spirit who dwells among us. And in the name of Christ we pray. Amen. I want to read from John chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." And having said this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. And so the man went and washed and came home seeing. My junior year of college for spring break mission trip, we went to Birmingham, Alabama, and we worked with an inner city ministry there. And during the course of the week, one day they asked me to share and to teach at a gathering that this church was having in the middle of the day. And so we gathered together, and before I got up to talk, Luis got up, and Luis shared his story. And man, his story had everything. Luis, as a young man, became an officer in the Mexican mafia in San Antonio. And he had gone through and he had made and he had wasted tens of thousands of dollars in wanton living. He had been up, dealing and selling and trading drugs. He had been in fist fights and knife fights and gun fights, and he crossed his mob bosses, and he was on the run from the mob, and that's when he met Jesus. And that's when his life turned around. And so he shared that story, and he sat down, and then it was my turn to get up and talk. And I'm like, how am I supposed to top that story right there? I was like, "Hi, my name is Jordan," and man, there was one time when I missed Sunday night church 6 weeks in a row. But then I met Jesus, and my life turned around. And it just thought, my testimony is nothing compared to his story. And as Luis was talking about that, and I was trying to think, what am I supposed to do with this? It occurred to me that for me in my life, if I'm going to be really honest, most of my problems in my life started after I met Jesus, not before. And I'm excited about, and I love the stories like Luis, the dramatic conversion stories, the dramatic stories of faith. But I do wonder if our way of telling about the story of Jesus, the way that we share our stories, kind of cripple us and hinder us in our walk. Because the way we share our story and the way that we have the story is told, it says, I had problems, and then I met Jesus, and now I don't have any problems. I had problems, I had things going on, I met Jesus, and now I don't have problems. And that way of thinking doesn't really match reality because we have problems. We have problems. We have troubles. And it might be that you are a faithful follower of Jesus and you still have money problems. You have problems paying rent or making the electricity bill. Or that you can be a faithful follower of Jesus and have health problems. You can be a faithful follower of Jesus and have a difficult marriage. You can be a faithful follower of Jesus and your family life is troubling and difficult. Being a follower of Jesus doesn't mean that we don't have any problems. And sometimes we think there's something wrong with us. We think that maybe there's something wrong with the gospel, because the truth of the matter is, in my life and maybe in your life, it wasn't that I had problems, I met Jesus, and now everything's good, the curtains close, and we don't have any more problems in our lives. In fact, some of us have problems not in spite of Jesus. Some of our problems are because of Jesus. Some of the problems that we face in life are because of Jesus. It might be that the way we spend money has changed dramatically because of our relationship with Jesus. And now I'm not going to just pursue and capture anything that comes to my eye and go after that, but I'm going to organize my finances around kingdom principles, and so I can't keep up with the Joneses anymore. Or it might be that your social life was second to none. And because you followed Jesus and because you've made a commitment to Jesus, now on Friday nights you find yourself in the dorms or you find yourself in the apartment by yourself. Or it might be that you go to camp, and while you're at camp you make this incredible decision, and this is how I'm going to change, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to be different. But the moment you get back from camp, your phone starts lighting up with texts saying, come and be a part of what we're doing. And then when we're not, they say, well, you've changed. Something's wrong with you. Something's different about you. And we lose friendships. We lose relationships. Sometimes we can face problems not in spite of Jesus. Sometimes we can face problems because of Jesus. And that's really what John centers on and tells us about the story of the man who was healed. This man was born blind. And Jesus comes, and his disciples, they want to have this great theological conversation about the problem of sin and sickness in the world. And here, Jesus, was this man blind because he sinned or because of his parents? And Jesus basically says, I don't want any part of that conversation. But I'll tell you right now that God's work is going to be displayed in his life. And then Jesus spits on the ground and makes mud, which, by the way, imagine if you're the blind guy. I mean, how terrible is this? All of a sudden you hear, all the noises, and then the next thing you know, it's going on your eyes, on your face. Jesus, smear it on there. And then Jesus tells him what to me sounds like the most ridiculous thing you would ever tell somebody: go and wash. You wouldn't have to tell me that, right? And so he goes to the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So here's the word picture. The water of life sends a man to the sent waters to wash, to be healed. And it's a sign. It's a sign. And he washed, and he could see. And if John had closed the curtains right then, If John had closed the curtains right then, wouldn't it be a wonderful miracle? But John keeps on going, and John's going to show us that the man's problems are just beginning. Because immediately, this is what happens next. It says his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" And some claimed he was, and others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. And he replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went, I washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. He opens his eyes, but Jesus is nowhere to be found. Jesus is not in the picture at that moment, but everyone who used to know him is there. Everyone who used to know him is looking at him, and immediately they greet this not with awe and wonder, but with suspicion. They say, "Oh, well, isn't it convenient that now you can suddenly see? After we've been giving you money all our lives, have you been pretending this whole time? Who healed you? How did this happen?" He's insisting, "I was healed. Jesus healed me." "Oh, really?" And then they start in. And can't you hear the conversation going? "We liked you better when you were blind. What happened to that fun blind guy? But where did he go? We enjoyed hanging out with the blind guy. We enjoyed having our day every morning going, "Oh, well, there's our blind friend, and we're going to give him some money and go about our day. And now you've gone and you've changed. Do you think you're better than us?" And we're laughing about that, but some of you know what it's like to turn your back on sin or turn your back on addiction, and the next words that are coming from the people who know you best and know you longest, your friends, are saying, "We liked you better before. We liked you better back when. Remember how we used to. Remember what it used to be like. And now because you're different, everything's changed. We liked it better before." The initial pushback on this man's life are his friends and his neighbors. And they're not excited about the change that they see in him. And so they run off and they go get the religious police, the Pharisees, to come out. And they say, "We need you to look into this incident right here." And now here comes the Pharisees. And the Pharisees show up. And this is what they say. They brought through the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. And therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "We put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." And so the Pharisees are arguing over how this happened. How can this be? How could this possibly happen? So they turn and they asked the man. They say, "Who do you think this Jesus is?" And he responds, they turned again to the blind man, "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And the man replied, "He is a prophet." And when he was talking to his friends, they said, "How did this happen?" And he said, "The man named Jesus healed me." And now the Pharisees come and they say, "What do you think about him?" And they say, "He is a prophet." Well, the Pharisees don't like the direction this is going, and they don't like the testimony they're coming out. So they're going to try to put holes in the witness. And so they drag out the man's parents. Let's go make sure that this is really who he says he is. And so the parents come out, and the Pharisees begin to interrogate the parents. And the parents they freeze. They don't want to be put under the sights of the Pharisees. They're scared of what might happen. They don't know what answer is going to do what. And so they simply back out and they turn their back on the man and say, "He's old enough. He's a legal adult. You ask him, leave us out of it." And they wash their hands of the situation and go. And so all of a sudden, this man has had his friends and his family turn their backs on him. And they've turned their backs on him, and the Pharisees come after this man again, and this is the exchange that they have. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. And he replied, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind and now I see. That's a dunk. And then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I have told you already and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? And then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciples. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. And the man answered, isn't that remarkable? You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And to this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Now when they threw him out, they threw him out. What goes without being said, because of the culture, they would have assumed that we would know that being thrown out meant that you were thrown out of the synagogue and you were thrown out of the temple. And they threw him out and expelled him from the temple and from all of synagogue. And the temple was the center for the Jewish religion. And when he's thrown out, he no longer has a place or a way to worship. He's thrown out from worship. This is the center of Jewish society. He's now on the outside of society. If you've been thrown out, you're not allowed to have contact with your friends and family anymore. He's been thrown out. And in the temple and the synagogue, that was the legal system as well. He is now a persona non grata in his own community. He's a man who's living without civil rights in his own community. He has no rights of citizenship even in his own country. He's thrown out and he's separated and he's completely cut off from everything. And he's lost it all. He's lost his friends. He's lost his family. He's lost his religion. He's lost his place in society. He's lost all his legal status and all of his legal rights. He has been completely ruined because Jesus gave him his sight. Jesus healed his eyes and ruined his life right in that same moment. See, the way that he would tell a story is not to say that I had problems and then Jesus came and now I don't have any problems anymore. The way he tells his stories, he says, a man named Jesus, who was a prophet, who was from God himself, came. And I might have problems, and you might disown me, and you might have kicked me out, but this is what I know. I once was blind, but now I see. I once was blind, but now I see. And because he goes back to what he knows, he goes back to that moment where his eyes were opened. He has a vision. And his faith is increased. It's now no longer just Jesus the man or Jesus the prophet. This is Jesus who is from God. And the more he's reflecting and the more he's sharing, the more the reality sinks in that this Jesus is sent from God. This Jesus is the one who's been promised. This Jesus is God's Son among us. And he goes back to what he knows. And even though there's problems and even though it costs, he once was blind, but now he sees. In church, I can tell you story after story of men and women whose problems just began when they met Jesus. Think about Paul, who was in one of my youth groups. Paul grew up in a Christian home, but he wanted nothing to do with Jesus, and he got deeply, deeply entrenched in the drug community. But a senior year of high school, he gave his life to Christ. And when he did, all of his friends turned their back on him, and he was alone. I think about Maria. Maria grew up in a wealthy, wealthy family in Brazil. She met a Christian missionary, and she started listening to this man talk about Jesus and how Jesus was more than just a cultural thing, and how Jesus would give real life. And the family warned her and said, if you go down this road, everything's going to change. Yet Maria was baptized. In the moment that she was baptized, her family cut her off and left her penniless and destitute. Think about Nancy. Nancy lived in Abilene. Her husband was an airman at Dyess Air Force Base, and she was invited by a friend to start attending a Bible study, and she had never heard about Jesus before, and she learned more and more about Jesus. And when Nancy was baptized, her husband barred her from coming home. She was divorced and homeless. And in all of those cases, Paul, Maria, and Nancy, and so many others, they would go from the prayer meeting to the court hearings and go from job interview to job interview. And they would spend those nights alone and by themselves. And they didn't know what was coming. They didn't know how the story was going to end. They didn't know how everything was going to turn out. But this is what they know. I once was blind, but now, because of Jesus, I can see. Because of Jesus, I can see. And I wouldn't trade any of what I've got now, any of the problems that I have, for that blindness again. I wouldn't go back to that life. I wouldn't make that trade. I wouldn't do that deal. I can see. And I can have life because of Jesus. See, the truth, church, and the reality is this: if we hold on to what we know, if we go with what we know and remind ourselves that I once was blind, but now I see, if we hold on to that long enough, our testimony will outlast our problems. Our testimony will live a lot longer than our tests. And eventually, we will see Jesus face to face. Our faith will become sight. And this is the moment that this man got to experience. This is how John ends this account. He says this, starting in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I've come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Jesus comes and he finds this man when he hears that he's been removed and he's been kicked out. And he appears before the man and he says, I want to ask you, do you believe in the Son of Man? That is a loaded question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Do you believe in the one that God has appointed, the man sent from God to right every wrong and to bring justice and judgment on this earth? Do you believe in that person? And the man simply says, if I could see him, I'd believe. And Jesus says, he's right in front of you. And at that moment, the man worshiped. He doesn't need a building. He doesn't need a synagogue. He doesn't need a set of rules. He doesn't need anything. When he is before Jesus, he can worship. And he is free to pour out his heart in worship. He's free to come up to him. And he's free to bring him all of the pain and all of the burdens and all of the sadness, and to lay that at the feet of Jesus and to worship there. And church, we need to take an opportunity. And if you once were blind and now you can see, I want to invite you to worship Jesus with me. Would you stand right now? Let's sing these songs together.